Let's continue our discussion of differentiated products duopoly. Now where we left off, and it's funny, here's a picture of the Batman symbol from the old TV show. I don't know if any of you remember this, but that show typically had episodes in two parts, and at the end of many episodes there would be some sort of cliffhanging situation where Batman and Robin were in terrible peril. And so in the spirit of that, let's just say where we left off. Actually, there was no peril, but there was a great deal of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. So let's resolve some uncertainty. But first, a reminder of the situation before. We had, remember, we had two firms with differentiated products, and they were choosing the equilibrium arose where their best price is a function of the other firm's best price, where those reaction curves crossed each other. And what the symmetric duopolists chose was each of them charged a price of 25, each produced 75 units of output, and the profits were 1,875 per firm. Now the question jumping into this new set of slides is, could they have done better? And so one question to think about is, what if they were one firm with two products? Right? So think about them as a multi-product monopolist. Now, this can be a hard problem to work out, but we can actually do it in a relatively easy way. We can make it simple. The way we can make it simple is by noting that the problem is symmetric. And that means that whatever the best price is going to be, it's going to be the same for each of the firms, which really simplifies the problem. We're not going to need two separate prices floating around. We'll just have one price. And when we think about the problem that way, it won't be so hard. So using the symmetry idea, we can simplify the demand curve. So for example, firm 1's demand curve, Q1 is equal to 100 minus 3P. It used to be a 1 there and a 2 here, but we're saying now P1 and P2 are going to be equal. So let's just call it, treating these as the same, it's going to be 100 minus P, which we can rewrite as P equals 100 minus Q1. And then MR equals 100 minus 2Q1 is the marginal revenue curve. It's got the same intercept and twice the slope. MC is 0. This is now a simple monopoly problem for us. Q1 is equal to 50 and P is equal to 50. And the same is true for firm 2. Well, now that means we have that P1 equals P2 is equal to 50. And then Q1 and Q2 are each equal to 100 minus 3 times 50 plus 2 times 50, and so that equals 50. And finally then, each firm's profit is 50 times 50, or 2,500. So yes, they could do quite a lot better, to get back to the question we were posing. They could do a lot better than the 1875 they were generating in profit. Now so far, we've thought about what if each firm prices at 25, and we found the payoffs then. We've thought about what if each firm prices at 50, and we found the payoff to each of the respective firms then. Now I want to ask the question, what if the firms priced in ways that were inconsistent with each other? So what if firm 1 were to price at 25, while firm 2 behaves as if they were colluding? So in other words, firm 2 charges 50 and firm 1 charges 25. Well, what happens? Let's look at it for each of the firms. Over at firm 1, profits are equal to P1 times Q1. Firm 1 is charging the low price, and so they get P is 25, and their Q is 100 minus 3 times their own price, plus 2 times the other firm's price. And that ends up being 31.25. What about over at firm 2? Remember, firm 2 is charging the high price. And so P2 times Q2 is, here's P2 is 50, and Q2 is 100 minus 3 times their own price, which is 3 times 50, plus 2 times 25, and that actually equals 0. Ouch! Wow, that really hurts. Now, let's think a little bit intuitively about what's going on here, what it means to be charging a high price versus a low price. Like, with respect to the two firms, who's being a good guy and who's being a weasel here? Well, the firm that's charging the high price is being a good guy. Now, why is that? Because the high price tends to stimulate demand for the other firm's product. The firm charging the low price is kind of deviating from what looks like a collusive agreement. In fact, you could think about this as a deviation from a 50-50, that is, each of them charges 50 situation. And in that case, firm 1 is taking advantage of the fact that firm 2 is charging a high price and sending some demand over to firm 1. As a result, firm 1 makes out like a bandit, makes 31.25, while firm 2 makes 0. Now the punchline from this slide is supposed to be, and it is in fact, that there's a strong incentive to deviate from this collusive agreement, or the collusive arrangement of both of them charging 50. And we can think a little bit about what would make the collusive arrangement more stable, and we'll talk about that as we go. But another thing we can talk about is a way to put all this into a context and framework that we've already seen. And in fact, if you had a hunch we were headed this way, in fact we are, that you can think about pricing in this model as a prisoner's dilemma. So this slide just illustrates the decisions that each of the firms can make. Firm 1 could charge 25 or 50. Firm 2 could charge 25 or 50. And depending on what the two firms do, we end up with these payoffs to firm 1 and 2. In this case, it's profits, but you could generally call these payoffs. But here, the payoffs, or the thing that you get for ending up in that box, are the profits for firm 1, pi 1, and pi 2. So, for example, if both firms charge 25, then each firm has 1875 in profit. If both firms charge 50, then each firm has 2,500 in profit. And finally, if firm 1 charges 50, while firm 2 charges 25, then 1 gets 0, 2 gets 31.25, and vice versa. Vice versa being this other off-diagonal box. Now, let's think about what the incentives are here. And remember, when firm 1 is making its decision, which it's making not knowing what firm 2 has done or will do, and so we would call this a simultaneous decision, then firm 1 has to think about the various things firm 2 might do. And so what are those things? Well, one thing that firm 2 could, quote, compete or charge this price of 25. If firm 2 were doing that, then firm 1's choice about whether to be here or here is a choice between making 1875 and making 0. Now, of course, 1875 is better than 0 because profits are a positive payoff. So if firm 2 were charging 25, firm 1 would prefer to charge 25. And that's the story in this bullet point. If firm 2 were charging 50, then firm 1 would be choosing between 31.25 if firm 1 were to charge 25, and 2,500 if firm 1 were to charge 50. 31.25 is bigger than 2,500, and so if 2 were to collude or charge 50, then 1 would prefer to charge 25. Bottom line, either way, compete, or P1 equals 25, is better for firm 1. And this problem is symmetric, so compete or charge a price of 25 is better for firm 2 as well. Now what that means is although they would both prefer to be here. So that's what firms prefer. They would be driven by these prisoner's dilemma incentives to end up here. So we could say end up here, even though prefer here. That's the sense in which this is a prisoner's dilemma. Now, what I want to talk about for a few slides is ways one might try to go about getting to that more profitable box. And so one way, we'll start with something a little bit sort of scandalous as a way to try to get to that more profitable box. And this is literally the transcript of what's called a famous phone call. And I'll just read a little bit of this because it's kind of fun. As reported in the New York Times, a phone call from Robert Crandall of American Airlines to Howard Putnam of Braniff Airlines took place on February 21st, 1982. The call was recorded by Mr. Putnam. Yes, indeed, Mr. Putnam was wearing a wire. Okay, so Crandall, and by the way, Crandall may be known to you because he's the inventor essentially of frequent flyer miles. So he's a important guy in the history of marketing and business. But he was CEO at the time of American Airlines. So he says to Putnam, I think it's dumb as hell, for Christ's sake, all right, to sit here and pound the expletive deleted out of each other and neither one of us making an expletive deleted dime. Putnam says, well, and Mr. Crandall says, goddamn, what the hell is the point of it? Putnam says, but if you're going to overlay every root of Americans on top of every root that Braniff has, I can't just sit here and allow you to bury us without giving our best effort. Crandall says, oh, sure, but Eastern and Delta do the same thing in Atlanta and have for years. Putnam says, do you have a suggestion for you? Crandall says, yes, I have a suggestion for you. Raise your goddamn fares 20%. I'll raise mine the next morning. Putnam says, Robert, Crandall says, you'll make more money and I will too. Putnam says, we can't talk about pricing. And Crandall says, oh, expletive deleted, Howard. We can talk about any goddamn thing we want to talk about. Well, actually, you can't. It is explicitly illegal to conspire to raise prices or to fix quantities. So no, that's not right. I don't want you to take away from this slide that this is a desirable or sensible thing to do. It's actually quite illegal. The only reason that Crandall ended up not going to jail for this was that they did not, in fact, conspire. This was like attempted price fixing, but it wasn't consummated price fixing. So somehow, I guess with clever lawyering, he did not get in trouble. But in general, this is very illegal in the U.S. Antitrust system. But, back to the point of these slides, this is one way to try to get to that more profitable box, but one that you shouldn't do. Now, how else can one get there? And one more kind of fun slide before we get back to the hard stuff. I want to share this quote with you. People of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. And you can ask yourself, who said this? Was it Andrew Carnegie? Was it Adam Smith? Was it Karl Marx? Was it Groucho Marx? Well, I won't tell you now, but you think about it. All right, well, let's get back to the thread of these slides. So explicit collusion is illegal in the U.S., but there are some ways to end up in that more collusive box. One is literally mergers. There are instances, so when a merger is legal, and although this is not a deeply antitrusty class, there are a lot of times when you can merge with your rival. And once you've merged, it's fully legit for you to price as one firm because you are one firm. So that's one way. Although some mergers are forbidden precisely because once you are merged, you would price in a way that would be harmful to consumers. But there still are instances where mergers are allowed. And again, once you've merged, you can price any way you like inside the firm. A second way is you could call signals or price leadership, kind of in harking back to our dominant firm model. But, think about this. Suppose you're a big firm and you have a rival. When your rival raises his or her price, how should you think about that? One way to think about that is that, they've raised their price. Maybe I should keep my price low and try to take a lot of business. Of course, that's what they're afraid of when they think about raising their price. Another way for you to think about them raising their price is that it's like an olive branch. They're doing you a giant favor and hoping you'll reciprocate by also raising yours, even without any explicit cooperation or explicit collusion. So, sometimes one firm raising its price can give rise to an occasion where other firms would want to raise their price, even just to keep things stable. And of course, it would be good for the firms. So that's another kind of conduct-based way that you might end up in the more profitable box. One last kind of institution that seems to favor ending up in the high-profit box is maybe somewhat counterintuitively things like price matching guarantees. So we'll often look at the newspaper or look wherever at advertising and see that some firms will say we will match any competitor's advertised price, which sounds like a wonderfully pro-consumer thing. They're offering to meet anybody's low price. But thinking about it kind of two steps ahead, what does it do to the competitor's incentive to charge a lower price in the first place? Well, it somewhat undermines the competitor's incentive to do that. So in some ways, what it is a way to say to the competitor, don't bother going to the low price because I'll match you if you go there. You might as well stay at the high price. And then what's unsaid is then I'll do the same. So, one can think about low price guarantees or price matching guarantees as potentially having a similar effect of promoting, ending up in that high profit collusive box. All right, another way to think about this problem, to think about how might firms end up in the high profit box, is to think about what we call repeated games. Up to now, we've been looking at these sets of payoffs as though it occurred once and then it was over. But of course, in reality, you could think about those as like the profits this year, and then there's next year and a subsequent year and a subsequent year, until the sun's supernovas, which is pretty far off in the future. And so we can revisit the question of should I charge the collusive price or the Bertrand price? Think about it in the shadow of the future. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, firms last many periods, so you've got to worry about future consequences of current decisions. Suppose you find yourself in a situation where you and your big rival are both charging the high price. Now, of course, from previous slides in this little setup that there's a great temptation for you to charge a low price because you'll get lots of profits this period, and in our model with our numbers, your competitor gets no profits. But then what happens next period? Maybe next period you're both in that kind of unhappy box, charging the 25 price. So which means that you went from both being in the high profit box, and that was good news for you guys. Then you got one extra high period of profit, followed by an eternity of low prices. Now, if you think about the costs and benefits of doing that, of charging that low price and getting a bonus for it this period, but being punished into the future, that might give you pause about doing that. So the threat of an eternity of lower profits might be some discipline to stay with that higher price box and higher profit box. And so you can think of that as a way out of the prisoner's dilemma. And I guess just sort of stepping back and saying, what does it really mean here? If a pair of firms finds itself with high prices and high profits, doing something different, starting a price war, is rocking the boat and potentially endangering a long stream of future profits. And so that could give a firm pause about doing that. All right, well, what are the takeaways from this part 2 module on the differentiated products duopoly? A couple of things. First of all, we started here with these two possible prices. We had the Bertrand price, 25, the collusive price of 50. And the prisoner's dilemma setup leads us to that Bertrand box, which is bad news for firms, but I should note it's good news for consumers relative to the collusive box. Notwithstanding that it's good news for consumers, it is bad news for firms. So we want to think a little bit about how we can get better news for firms. And the last set of things we talked about were ways of getting to that happier, more profitable box. Some of those ways are explicitly illegal and should never be done. But there are ways that are that are not illegal. Sometimes just charging a high price and having your rivals follow you can do that. Mergers, when they're allowed, certainly allow you to price in a coordinated fashion. And price matching guarantees can be seen as mechanisms that discourage ending up in the low price equilibrium.